Yeah.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in. So I'm here right now with Jenn, Henley, Vice President of Technical Program Management and Infrastructure at Facebook. So I'm going to go ahead and quickly introduce myself as well. So my name is Angel. I'm currently going into my second year of computer science at the University of Waterloo, and I'm interning right now at Morgan Stanley. And I'm also one of the organizers of CUTC this year. So we can just get so walk me through kind of your career development. You got into tech from a non-technical background, and just kind of walk me through the steps that you took to lead you to your role today at Facebook.
Sure. And thank you very much, Angel, for the intro and the welcome. I'm thrilled to be here with everybody today. So I had a really interesting journey into tech, mostly for a couple of and just kind of my career in general, mostly for a couple of reasons. I had some of the things I said when I was in college that, I mean, to me are so funny now, is I said I was never going to work in tech and that I was never going to work in corporate America. And those, like both of those things kind of defined my entire career. So my first job out of college was actually with Anderson Consulting. And they have a very rigorous boot camp process, basically, where they would take people and they would teach you how to program. So it was interesting because I took this role and I took this job. I learned how to program in C++ in about 8 weeks. And what I realized when I was in these sessions and going through everything is I really, really liked it. Like I really, really liked the aspects of tech, of, kind of having these ambiguous, uncharted problems and getting to figure out how to solve them. But one of the things I loved about the way Anderson did it was they kind of put you together in these groups. So they would have one person who was very well versed and, had graduated with computer science degrees. And then there was the other side of the spectrum, which was me, somebody who hadn't had much exposure to this in college and what it was. So it was a really great jumping off, kind of springboard and platform to me to realize how much I actually enjoyed being in tech and that aspect of it. But I think the other side is kind of some of the path that's led me down, which is realizing how much I love that collaborative, cross-functional work and, working with a team of people to solve a problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Definitely transitioning from a non-technical background, especially, it kind of allows you to take a different perspective on the tech industry, and it allows you to bring in different elements to the world that you were in before transitioning into tech. So building off of that, kind of going through your career again, I was wondering if you could kind of walk me through mistake that you made, because I know that, for me and for everyone else that's listening as well, making mistakes is so, everyone makes them and it's so common, but I think people are sometimes afraid to talk about it. So maybe you could walk me through and how that kind of shaped you into who you are today, and also what you learned from it and what you kind of took away.
Sure. And I mean, I will say, and I love your framing on this, Angel, because I actually feel the biggest growth we have in our lives and in our careers is actually when we do take those risks. And if you're going to take risks, you're going to make mistakes along the way. I always say, failure is not the worst thing. It's that fear that comes before it, which actually prohibits you from, reaching your true potential. So I'll say there's two things that I'm going to say. One that's from kind of a career perspective, and then another one is like a programmatic thing that I crashed and burned, and it was terrible, and I learned so much from it. From a career perspective, I would say at one point in time, I took a role in my career that on paper seemed perfect. Like it was a promotion to a director level role. It was going to be, in the C-suite, and everything just on paper seemed perfect. But from the very get-go going in there, I just didn't feel a good connection with the person who was going to be my manager, as well as the fact that I just felt very stifled, and that it wasn't a very innovative, and creative role, which are things that are really important to me. And I took this role purely because of the title and because I was going to be making more money. And I ended up being really, really unhappy in it. And, I look at it from both sides of the coin. I'm sure they didn't get the best of me because I wasn't really happy in what I was doing. But the great thing that ended up being, from that side, it was actually the springboard. It was the role I had right before I came to Facebook. And, I wasn't looking to, I wasn't looking to go to Facebook. I didn't approach them. They approached me. And I think if I hadn't been in that scenario I was in, I probably never would have ended up where I am today. So, that was one thing that I think became really clear to me. Like, don't just chase the title and the money, because if you're unhappy in it, it really isn't going to matter, and you're not going to grow much, and you're probably going to hit a ceiling a lot faster. From a programmatic perspective, I would say one of the things I did that, it ended up being successful, but I think the process to get there was incredibly painful, and I could have done a lot better. We have this training and awareness program at Facebook, which is tied to our cybersecurity awareness, which is called Hacktober. And it's basically a month-long series of events that we do every year in October to help our employees kind of recognize the importance of information security and the role they play in it. And I was part of this small group of people who first came up with this idea back in 2011. And I was very new to the company. I had only been there 3 months at the time. I think 2 when we started planning it. And I got involved in all of this stuff. And I was so focused on the end goal and what we were doing, I just missed all of these incremental steps in terms of how to bring other people along, how to collaborate better in this, how to land the narrative and the message of what we were trying to do and why, and explain to people what this meant. And it was really, really hard because I would do these posts in these large group, in our company-wide groups, and there's 2,500 people in there. And I'm just getting slammed left and right from, why didn't you do this? Why are you doing this? And, it was this really vulnerable moment for me. But there was a lot I learned on that. And I think the important thing was, at the end of the day, the initiative and the program itself wasn't a failure. And if anything, it's even strong. It's carried on for a decade. And we've worked with other companies to build programs separately. But I think for me, my role in it, I saw as kind of a failure and a huge learning opportunity. Just because I was so focused on the end goal that I really forgot to bring other people along. And I always go back to that in my head now, anytime I'm working on a large program or a large initiative.
Yeah, for sure. I think you touched on some great points. And I think something that, is kind of glossing on an end goal, we never really, I feel like we always just kind of zone in on that end goal, and we don't really think about the intermediate steps that we need to take and the effort that we need in order to reach that end goal. So definitely taking things step by step is super, super important. And I also like that you mentioned how unhappy in a role that, seems so great on paper, because I think that oftentimes it's so hard to admit to yourself that something that seems so right on paper and seems so just doesn't work for you. So I think it was really brave of you to even just admit to yourself that you in that role and that you needed a change. So much for sharing, because I'm sure everyone, including myself, have learned so much from your experiences. But kind of taking a different route now, I know I kind of want to you were able to build such an amazing and successful career in an industry dominated, and kind of going through your experiences as a woman in tech and maybe some of the struggles that you faced today.
Yeah, and it's it's not something I want to gloss over and say, oh, it's been fine, it is what it is, or any of that, because I have two little girls. I have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, and I always say that my hope for them is, by the time that they're working and they're in their careers, this no longer, because if they go into tech, this no longer is a topic of conversation, because it just has become something that, we have this, we have representation in tech that is representative of the population at large. It's been hard. I mean, there's a lot of times I'm the only woman in the room. And I think as I've grown in my career from a seniority perspective, that becomes even more evident and more apparent to me. And that is, that can be tough at times. I think it has been, incredibly challenging as you get into leadership roles as well. My reality is very different than that of some of my peers. I work full time. My husband works full time. I have 2 little kids. I work with a lot of people who, whether they have stay-at-home spouses or, their children are older, we have very different realities of what, life is like outside of work. But I think that's always so important, because everybody brings their own life perspective and their own journey. And this is how we evolve, and this is how we grow. It's how we grow as a company. It's how we grow as an organization, is our ability to kind of see those different viewpoints and recognize, not everybody has walked the same path. And I think for me, one of the things that I had to learn very early on in my career is to be comfortable in owning my truth and my journey, and being comfortable in being able to express that, instead of just assuming, I had to take on the persona or the life, choices that everyone around me had taken, or what that was. And, that's tough. And, there's been times I've been super passionate about topics I've touched on, and, I've gotten very emotional in the sense of, crying, because it just brings so much to the surface for me. I think it can also be really challenging, because sometimes when you're the only woman in the room and you express an opinion, people assume you're speaking for all women. And I always feel the need that I have to say, I'm speaking for myself. I'm speaking for myself. I don't assume you're speaking for every other man around us. The same way I hope you don't assume I'm speaking for every other woman, because we are all unique and we all have our own experiences. And, it has been tough. But I think for me, what has helped me is just that confidence to be able to, like I said, just kind of own my reality. And this is my story. And, what it really came down to is no one can tell it like I can, because it's mine. And I'm going to share my opinions. I'm going to share my perspectives on that. And I'm going to continue to push for this broader narrative to recognize, for me, it's not just about, females or males. It's about the fact that each of us has walked a different journey, and we need to be open to that and recognize that it hasn't been the same path for each person. And I think the more we can do that, the more we're going to create, more inclusive and more sense of community, which is what we need to do to continue to change the narrative and change the trends we're seeing on this.
100%. I think especially in the tech industry, you often see people kind of typing, not only women, but just people in the industry in general. You have people who assume that you've walked a certain path and that you've had the same experiences. But the truth is that everyone in the industry has their own, bring awareness to that, and really show that, there isn't a specific mold that people in the industry fit into. Like, the industry is so diverse, and everyone, like, diverse backgrounds. And we need to be appreciative of that, because that's what makes the industry unique.
And I think the other thing I'll add on that, Angel, is I think this is where it's just important for the role that everybody plays in this, to kind of recognize when you see these, whether it's these, biases or these microaggressions, or even, sometimes the stuff that is so subconscious that you call other people on it. And you can do that respectfully. And I remember one time, one of the times it was so hard for me is somebody had at one point in time told me that the only reason I was in the role I was in was because of my husband, which was like the most ridiculous. It was ridiculous to me, but what was amazing for me to see, it was even more ridiculous to him. But I think having those people around you who will continue to push that narrative and call people on it. So you're not always carrying that, that yourself. That can do tremendous things from a motivation perspective to, continue to push forward. And I think that's why it's really important to, for everybody, I don't care what your background is or where you've come from, to look for that and call that out so that we can help each other and we can support each other, because it's hard to carry it on your own shoulders.
Mm-hmm, for sure. I think a lot of the times, and I've noticed this too in my the people around me as well. I think as women, a lot of the times people like to attribute, is from like something else. They'll always say you're only in this position or you only have this because of like X, Y, and Z, and that's not true. And I think because people do that and because it's so accepted within the industry, because it's so common to see, I think that's also why a lot of women experience imposter syndrome, because they question themselves and they question like maybe what everyone's saying is true, like maybe because of like, certain conditions, but that's not true. And we really need to recognize, the effort that we put in order to achieve the goals that we have, achieved. But yeah, so kind of moving on to more specifically your role as a technical program manager, could you kind of walk me through kind of what that entails and advice into PM from a technical background?
Sure. So, it's always a hard role to describe, because we intentionally, like, the best program manager roles from my perspective and technical program manager roles are the ones that are really fungible. And when I was offered my job at Facebook, my hiring manager at the time had told me, he's like, I have no idea what you're going to do every day, and I have no idea what your title is going to be, but we have a lot of like stuff to figure out. Come help me tackle it. And that really speaks to me as a personality, from a personality perspective. But I think one of the things that I have loved about, technical program management, and specifically at Facebook, how we've continued to evolve this role, is that notion of fungibility. We have a lot of problems we need to solve. And our goal in this is to figure out, I always say it's when the rubber meets the road and you need to get stuff done. Like, how do you roll up your sleeves and actually implement all of this stuff we need to do? And how are you able to see around the corners and anticipate where there's going to be problems or challenges ahead, and bring people together to be thinking more proactively and 10 steps ahead versus just where we are now? And I mean, at the very fundamental level, we are all about execution. And, my team says, and excuse my language, is like, get shit done. At the end of the day, that's what we are all about. We want to get it done. We want to get it done proactively. And we want to get it done strategically. So we're bringing everyone along. And I would say for folks who are interested in kind of making this transition or where it is, when we look more broadly at companies that exist and what it is, technical program management is not the same everywhere, and program management isn't the same everywhere. And some of that does tie to that fungibility I talked about. But what we are seeing in industry now, and if you look at the Facebooks, the Googles, Amazon, Netflix, Microsoft, Apple, and then some of the up and coming companies we're seeing, Uber, Lyft, Stripe, Airbnb, all of these companies, they are, when they are looking at this in this role of what it means to be a technical program manager, that technical acumen and that technical background is the foundational aspect to be able to do anything else. We need to be able to go in rooms. We need to be able to contribute to the vision. We need to be able to contribute to the solutions. And more importantly, we need to be able to anticipate the problems. And to do that, you need to understand the stack you're working on. You need to understand the underlying technologies and figure out how to translate that into a plan. So, I think it's very different even than when I started 20 years ago, because where before the technical background and aspect was a nice to have, now it's actually like the foundational, you have to have it, because that's what's going to make you successful. And that's what's going to help drive the company as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was actually going to ask, like, do you think being from an asset when transitioning, or do you think that, it'll make you stand out?
I really do. And I mean, I think a lot of it depends on the company or the industry and where you are. But at the end of the day, regardless of how they define this role or how they, how they clarify their swim lanes in what these are, the technical background is never going to hurt, because that ability to be the person in the room who's not only able to see the technical challenges, but the organizational, the people, the process, and bring all of that together. That is a superpower that people can have that not a lot of people do. And when you can kind of bring all those aspects together, you really bring a unique skill set to the team in the room that most people probably, aren't focusing on. So that ability to go deep or broad is really, really important. And I think that the technical acumen is a game changer.
Mm-hmm. For sure. So we'll go through some questions from the audience.
Sure.
So someone asked experience about TPM, and do you have any suggestions for someone just in TPM?
Yeah. So I think for me, one of what just always is rewarding at the end of the day is, when you pour your blood, sweat, and tears into these programs and you look at all the complexity that goes into it, when you see that hit at the end and being able to know there was this problem that was out there, and then not only were you part of the solution, but you drove to get to that solution and that end goal, it feels really, really good. And for me, one of the things that I never liked about consulting, and it just didn't work for me personally, is I didn't like just telling people what was wrong. I wanted to actually fix what was wrong. And so one of the things I love about this is that ability for change, and that ability to fix, and that ability to see something land. And for me, being able to do that in a proactive way where, sometimes it's not about what fires did you put out? It's about what fires did you, avoid and keep from happening. And that is such a really empowering feeling at the end, to kind of look through the rear view and see everything, everyone that you worked with and everyone who came along to make something happen. That feels fantastic. I think for anybody just starting out in this and doing this, I would say, part of being a successful TPM, like I said earlier, is not just that ability to be deep in an area, but to go broad as well. And to be able to do that, you really have to have strong relationships. You have to be able to know different people. And then you have to be able to kind of influence that in terms of the narrative and how you're bringing people along. So I think too often what happens when we start out in things, we see all these problems and we just go and start trying to fix all of them. I think the best thing you can do when you're starting out, and I don't care if you're just starting out in your career, you've been in your career for 20 years. The best thing you can do anytime you're going into any of these is actually stop, listen, and learn by meeting the people, asking questions, and understand more broadly what's going on. Because oftentimes, if you're just plugging the holes in the dam and what's immediately in front of you, you're missing the cracks that are forming, further along, that are going to become more problematic. So really take the time to learn the space, learn the people, and learn how it interacts and all the intersection points. And that's going to drive exponential impact down the road.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Like as someone who's starting out in their career, I think something that I found really helpful too is just learning so much and not being afraid to ask questions, and not being afraid to admit that, you don't know something, and that's completely fine, and being willing to learn. Mentioned something about how you find TPM is a lot more rewarding than being in the consulting industry. So kind of moving on to another question, someone asked, why did you choose to get into tech from the consulting world, and did you face any challenges while making this transition?
Yeah, so I mean, it is, for me, it was purely one of those aspects that I realized, like I said, I liked being part of the solution and not just identifying where the problems were. I also really, I know some people love that ability to kind of bounce around and go to different companies and go see different problem sets. And don't get me wrong, I mean, there was a huge benefit to that at a point in time in my career, to be able to do that and see how different people do things and how different companies think about things. But for me, I wanted that depth that came from really learning from the inside in terms of, who are the people, what is going on, what are the broader challenges that, the company is facing. And I at least the projects and the programs I was on in consulting, I didn't have as much ability to do that. And, again, I wanted to be part of the solution, not just part of identifying the problem. Honestly, I didn't have much problem switching, but I think part of that was I made those transition calls pretty early on in my career, so that I was able to kind of build a lot of industry experience underneath it, and not just, not just the consulting experience. But I mean, it was, there were definitely aspects of it that came in from a transitional perspective, but I didn't feel it being too challenging. But again, I had a very short stint in consulting, so I think it wasn't really, kind of the foundational aspects of my career.
Mm-hmm. I think we have time for one more. Decision you've made as a TPM that you want to change?
I'll speak more from a org leadership perspective in TPM, because I think sometimes we don't trust our own instincts enough. This just isn't TPM. This is in general as people. I think sometimes we don't trust our own instincts enough and look too much for like having all our I's dotted and all our T's crossed, and we want every decision point possible. When I took on the role I'm in now, supporting the organization I am, I knew the bones were really strong, but we needed some movement. We needed some change in the team to really unleash the potential, and that there were going to need to be some organizational changes associated with that. I waited too long to pull the trigger on that. And I think what it was is because I had an instinct of what we needed to do and how that should look. But I think I waited too long to kind of make the decision, because I wanted so many data points and so many inputs, because I wanted to make sure, I was doing the right thing and I was thinking long-term enough. And really all it did was it took us longer to make this decision, but the end result was exactly kind of where we were in the beginning, maybe with a few different changes. So I think one of the things that really taught me is how to be able to move more quickly, trust my instincts, but also be able to articulate, like, this is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. These things might break, but I'm actually okay if they do, because we're going to fix them and we're going to iterate as we go. You don't have to have a perfectly baked solution every time, but you have to be able to articulate where are those gaps and where you think things might change. And that's been something I think probably it wasn't just TPM. For most of my early part of my career, I operated in that way. And I think it's only been in the last 4 or 5 years I've gotten a lot more comfortable doing that. But I still have to be reminded of it.
Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of the times we kind of strive for perfection, and we're so scared of, breaking things in production or this or that. And I think that sometimes that can our development and our growth. So I think it's important to kind of take those leaps of faith and trust your instincts. But yeah, so that kind of wraps it up. I wanted to thank everyone for tuning in, and thank you, Jenn, so much for taking the time today to chat with us. I know I learned a lot from everything that you shared, and I'm sure everyone else did as well. So thank you so much. Listening, I hope you're having a great event so far. We have more events throughout the day, so feel free to tune in. But yeah, Jenn, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, and I enjoyed spending the time with all of you. Have a great rest of your weekend.
All right. Bye, everyone.